Hey, it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And we're back with another segment of the M Squared TechCast. And we have, at this time, our weekly visit with our epidemiology and infectious disease expert, Fred Brown, who's been working on this stuff since he participated in the development of the first human HIV test way back in the 80s. So he is a recognized global expert on this stuff, and he has very generously made his time available to us over the last couple of months. Fred, we really do appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's great to help out, and happy to answer any questions we've got. I'd love to get into it.
Well, this week, I think you said you wanted to talk about testing, right?
Yeah.
Oh, happy to. Yes, if you want to. Testing is one of our big areas of challenge. One of the problems. So I have a little slide for you. Actually, I should. The first. So when you think about COVID, I guess the first thing to think about is whether or not you have the symptoms. And the symptoms have actually grown quite a bit since I first talked about it with you. Originally, when we talked about it, I'll just pull it up to the screen here. We had about 4 major symptoms back in March and April. We were talking about having, can you see everything in that?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So, we were talking about, where's our slideshow? There we go. We were talking about fever, which still is one of the big ones. About 80, can't see the slide anymore, but 88% of the time you'll have a fever. But that's not very specific because, you'll have a fever for a lot of different reasons. And so although it's, it's indicative of COVID, you want to have a few more to think about. And then we also had the dry cough. That's still stated back in March, we had it about 66%. Now it's about 68% of the time you'll have a dry cough with a fever. Those two things together are pretty indicative of something's being up. And then we also had, at that point, we thought we had some cognitive issues. So we thought people who are having a little bit of trouble thinking like they would, we changed that a little bit more toward fatigue. And then, of course, shortness of breath was the big one. If you have shortness of breath, that was a real problematic one because usually flu doesn't come with shortness of breath, whereas and flu usually comes with a wet cough, not a dry cough. So we had these symptoms, but here we've added a few to that since April. So loss of smell and taste was a big new one that was sort of interesting. That all of a sudden you lose your smell and taste. That's a big indicator of the fact you might have COVID. And sputum production did turn out there was a little bit of sputum involved, which we didn't recognize initially. Headache, muscle, joint pains, chills, the typical things you'd get with fever, nausea and vomiting, and some gastrointestinal issues have come up now as being part of the overall set of conditions. So one of the problems we're having is that we're not showing that there's at least a 20% chance you're going to be asymptomatic if you have the disease. And if you're asymptomatic, it means you don't have any of these symptoms or you don't have them in enough vigor that you decide to go to the doctor and get tested. And then, of course, you walk around and infect a lot. You can infect a lot of people. Even though you don't have a very bad disease, you can give it to somebody who's more sensitive and susceptible than you are, and they can have a really bad reaction. And that would be a shame. So if you have any kind of set of these symptoms, you should probably get a test. Because right now we're doing about 18,000 tests a day in Michigan now, so there shouldn't be any problem getting tests like there were initially. And if you think you've got some of these symptoms, then you can get a test. And now I will show you about some of these tests we've got. So there are 2 big kinds of tests, and one of the tests is the solid line tests. Those solid line tests indicate whether you have the virus active in you. And those are antigen tests and molecular PCR tests. So those are molecular, they actually detect the RNA of the virus right inside of you. And they can tell you that you've got active virus going because the virus will be shedding, and they'll detect all the DNA and RNA from the virus right in you. And you can see those, the blue line is a nasopharyngeal swab PCR. And you can see that the top of this line, it says before symptom onset, after symptom onset. So a lot of people walk around before they get any symptoms, and they'll get infected. And believe it or not, you're actually most infectious at about day 2.5 to 3. If you're typical, before you even get tested, before you even get these symptoms, you'll be at your most infectious stage. So that makes this thing hard to control. It's one of the reasons we have such a high what they call R naught in this space. But part of the problem with the nasopharyngeal swab is that it's very susceptible. It's a very sensitive test, very specific test. But if you don't take the swab right, with the right kind of swab and the right kind of technique, and you don't get deep enough in, or you don't happen to hit the virus, because it can hide here and there, then you'll get, of course, a false negative. And you'll think everything's great because everyone will say, hey, you don't have the problem. The problem is we didn't detect it in the swab itself. It turns out the nose is better to take but you should have the swab in both places. The nose is a little bit better. It's actually quite a bit better actually than the in the throat, unless you can get what they call bronchoalveolar lavage sputum. And there, usually you're actually in the hospital. You're probably aspirating the patient, and at that point, you're way down in the lung, and you can actually get a swab directly from the lung, and then it gets very, very precise. So then we detect at the 92% level. But if you're just talking about a nasopharyngeal swab, and then you got to put the nasopharyngeal swab in a special solution, and you got to send it off, and then they have to do everything right, and it's quite a sensitive test. So if your lab tech, makes a slight mistake, doesn't quite, the temperature isn't quite right, doesn't do enough repetition, and so on, they can make a little mistake here and there. So it turns out that everything's done perfectly. Then usually we say that we're at a clinical, we can detect things analytically at 99.6% of the time. And sensitivity, specificity is up in the high 90s. Unfortunately, with all the when you actually take it to the clinic and do everything in the clinic, the best we tend to get is about 85%. And that happens after about day 5, if you're typical, about day 5.5. So you have to, after you think you've got an infection, you think I just saw Aunt Jody, and Aunt Jody turned out to have COVID. Now I'm worried about whether I got COVID. You have to wait a few days. Or if you take, a lot of people are calling me up saying, Fred, I want to have our son see our grandparents. He lives in California, they live in Detroit. Can they come out and see him? And I said, well, that's great. They said, but we're worried that they're going to get caught in the air. They're going to catch something in the airplane. To really find out, you should wait. If you got caught something, if you got a disease from the airplane, you should probably wait about 5 days, 5.5 days to really get a good sense. If you only wait 2 to 3 days, the test will only be about 40%, 20 to 40% accurate. If you wait 3 days plus, then it's 70%. If you wait 5 days, then you're talking about the 85% kind of number. But we're never perfect, which is sort of sad. When you think about it, we're missing quite a few people who think that they're perfectly fine. And then they don't have any symptoms, so they don't go get tested, which is normal. Or they have symptoms, they get tested, and everything comes out okay. And they're still ill. And that's a problem. So you can see we've got all these different kinds of tests. They also have the respiratory tract, which as I said, it tends to be about 20-30% less effective unless you're taking the alveolar swab than the nasopharyngeal. And then what's interesting is we got these stool PCR tests. And so it turns out that if you're at University of Michigan, for example, MSU is doing a lot of this kind of work. They're actually looking at the effluent coming out of dormitories and figuring out whether they have some community spread in their dormitories. That's about a 55% accurate test. So it's not really accurate, but if you do enough of that and you see a trend and you see a spike, then you say, this could be a location that has a problem. So we're doing some of that to kind of see whether we've got a lot of community spread in an area, so we can then go and do more accurate testing as things go on. The other kind of test you see there is a dotted line test, and those are for what they call serology tests. That's to detect whether you've ever been infected. So if you are worried about you have an active disease, you want to get the PCR or the antigen testing, and the best tests are from Roche, Cepheid, and Sherlock. Well, Sherlock and Mammoth and GSK are going to come out with tests that actually you can do at home. Actually, it's a company called Casper and Mammoth GSK. They're going to come out with tests that you can be able to do at home to find out whether you got things. They'll come out in the next month or two, I think. Now, for serology testing, that just says whether I've got the antibody. So whenever you're attacked by a foreign object, your immunology system, you create antibodies. And that antibody is permanent. So even if you're attacked when you're 1 year old, when you're 95 years old and living on the Riviera, you'll still have those antibodies all those times later. So you can get this test done anytime, but if you're kind of thinking, hey, I just got over the disease, let me see if I got some good antibodies so I'm a little bit more immune protected. Now, we're not sure whether that does that yet. We're still doing some tests to find out what level of antibody, what kind of antibody makes you immune, but at least you can get a sense of whether you've got some antibodies. And that happens actually, the best chance to do that is about week 3 after your symptom onset. So that gives you some of the senses of some of the work that we're doing right now, and you can see that's about 70 to 80% accurate. So if you talk to these guys who are really expert in the space, they'll tell you get 3 antibody tests and really make sure, because sometimes we have some false positives, false negatives, and you don't want to make a mistake thinking, hey, I'm positive for antibodies, I'm going to go out there and conquer the world, and then find out, whoops, we made a mistake. Get the test done a couple times.
Well, do we even know, Fred, that antibodies confer any kind of immunity against future, reinfection?
No, we don't. There's a whole bunch of things we don't know about this. Actually, I made a list about some stuff we don't know. I don't know how much time we have, but if you want, I can take
3 minutes. We have 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay. Well, then really quickly, let's see here. Here are some of the things we don't know. Asymptomatic rates, they could be 20%, they could be 50%. I've seen, so we're talking there. Transmission rate, it could be lower or higher. 2.5 is quite a fast transmission rate. But you can see I got on number 4, immunity levels and durations. We're not sure, and we're not sure how good it is, and we're not sure how long it lasts. So it could go from anywhere from 8 to 24 months, and it could be anywhere from 0% immunity to 90% immunity.
Pretty big spread there. Yeah.
So those are some of the things we're not really sure about. At any rate, so I'm back.
We got about 2 minutes left. One of the things you wanted to touch on, what you sent me, was safe protesting with masks. Well, you got in 2 minutes. Kind of talk a little bit about that.
So if you have to protest, I understand. I told my youngest daughter, don't go, and she went anyway. But of course, she's got a better profile than I do. I'm at risk. She's not. So basically, if you're not at high risk, the risks are probably pretty low. So until you're 40, it's pretty low risk. I would still, number 1, wear a mask. If you're wearing a mask, be sure you put suntan lotion on, otherwise you're going to get a mask imprint on your face. That doesn't look so good. And so wear your sunscreen. Bring your sanitizer, and try to stay distant if you can. If you're going to get to the protests, drive your own car if you can. Don't drive with somebody else or a big group of people in a bus. And whatever you do, if they start throwing tear gas around and people start coughing, get out of there. Because number 1, you don't want to start having people coughing everywhere, especially because they're going to take their masks off and cough. Number 2, you don't want to get arrested, because the number 1 worst place to be right now is in jail. So you don't want to have any time in a paddy wagon, in jail, or anything like that. Now, they're not doing that in Detroit, but I saw a lot of stuff happening in other cities. So just be aware that you're putting yourself at a little bit of risk of that kind of activity happening, and you want to stay away from that. Carry a sign, don't shout, and try to stay upwind of people who are shouting, so that so that you're not going to get what they're spraying back toward you, because shouting does spray a lot of active virus in the air. And if you're shorter, you have a better chance of getting the disease than if you're taller. So if you're a short protester doing a lot of shouting in a big group of people without any PPE, you're in big trouble.
There you go. All right, we're gonna have to leave it at that. So go ahead, Matt, take us out.
All right, Fred, just real quick, the website for you is
FredBrown.com. Come and visit.
Additional four-year students love Lawrence Technological University's thriving campus life, but LTU has always met non-traditional students' needs too. Lawrence Tech offers over 100 degree and certificate programs that can get adult students started or back on track. And most of our classes are conveniently offered evenings at our beautiful Southfield campus or online, so you can balance your social, family, and work life even while you power up your career. Lawrence Tech, where Blue Devils dare.